Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So one of the first questions I had when I was watching The Force Awakens was, why does Finn leave the First Order? Now, I get it, life as a stormtrooper is pretty hard. And it's shocking to see one of your comrades die, but when's the last time you even saw a stormtrooper notice a friendly casualty? As a matter of fact, after doing some research, you find out that the First Order troopers are supposed to be even more emotionless than the Imperial stormtroopers. So, what gives? Why would someone like Finn, who knows no other life besides the First Order, just decide to leave? Finn was born 11 years after the Battle of Yavin, and shortly after his birth, he was taken away from his family. He was so young, he didn't even remember who his parents were. The First Order was different from the Empire. They believed that their stormtroopers needed to be trained from birth. This meant they would be more efficient fighters and much more loyal to the cause. Finn was immediately enrolled into the Cadet Training program. Although the First Order was a strict and sometimes unforgiving organization to be a part of, it was the only life Finn really knew. Like a lot of things in life, everything is about perspective and context. In my travels, I've noticed that people in third world countries with almost nothing to their names can be much happier than people in developed nations with material wealth, which is why every individual judges their own life based on what they know. And as a cadet, Finn's life wasn't all that bad. He had a routine, and more importantly, he had a close-knit group of friends. There was FN 2000. He called himself Zeros. Sometimes people whispered behind his back that he was designated Zero because no one expected much out of him. But that didn't bother him. He thought the 3 zeros in his names made him special. Then there was FN 2199. He just called himself Nines because he felt it sounded cool. And rounding out the group was FN 2003, who unfortunately was called Slip, a nickname he didn't get to choose. It was given to him because, well, he was clumsy. Finn himself didn't really have a nickname until he met Poe. He was just FN 2187. Everyone knew he was the best cadet in their class. Talented, strong, and intelligent, he was destined to become an officer. But this also drew some negative attention towards Finn, especially from older stormtroopers. They saw Finn as an outsider, someone who just didn't belong. Despite this, he loved his buddies, especially Slip. He was always a step slower and an inch off the target compared to the rest of them, but Finn had more than enough skill to compensate for the both of them. During one exercise, when their squad was assaulting a simulated Republic entrenched position, Slip fell behind. Finn naturally went back to help him. The objective was important, but he couldn't leave a man behind. He considered that the ultimate failure. After the exercise was over, Captain Phasma approached Finn and reprimanded him for helping Slip. She coldly explained that troopers like FN 2003 were weak links in the chain. If they couldn't help themselves, they weren't worthy to help the First Order. Finn and the FN Corps were finally deployed on their first mission. They were tasked with suppressing civil disorder on a mining colony called Pressy's Tumble. Finn's squad would accompany Captain Phasma to the negotiations with the head representative of the miners who were on strike. Captain Phasma handling a labor dispute, what could go wrong, right? They entered the room. The miners stood before them. The leader asks, "Have you considered our requests?" Captain Phasma responds, "I have given your request the thought it deserves." She turns to FN 2187 and says, "Kill them." Finn freezes. He's not sure he heard correctly. He never fired his blaster at a real-life person before, let alone an unarmed citizen of the First Order who was currently engaged in peaceful negotiations. But suddenly Slip broke the silence and began firing, and Zeros and Nines joined him. When the smoke settled, Captain Phasma proudly stood in front of the dead bodies of the miners and remarked, "You're now stormtroopers." The squad celebrated their first successful mission once they got back to the finalizer. But Finn excused himself. He went and found the combat simulator. He just needed some time to himself. And as the simulator started, the computer began sending resistance soldiers for him to shoot. But as the scenarios became more advanced, the computer started mixing in civilians armed with hidden weapons, and finally, women and children. Finn stopped firing. The discomfort that he had felt growing in the last few hours finally had turned to horror, panic, and a newfound awareness. What was he doing? As Finn stood shoulder to shoulder with his platoon in the atmospheric lander, his stomach churned in fear. This was rumored to be their first real deployment, with actual resistance. Finn was afraid of dying. He was afraid that his friends would get hurt, And lastly, he was afraid that he would have to kill, no, murder, women and children. The lander was designed with a ramp in the front, which meant the second the door opened, enemy fire would pour in. It forced the stormtroopers to move forward and not linger behind in the cover of the dropship. There was no room for cowardice and hesitation. Finn looked at Slip. He hoped his friend wouldn't freeze. He was a changed man now. After the last mission, even Captain Phasma had praised him for shooting first. The ship suddenly jarred against the ground. There was a moment of silence, and then, suddenly, the door dropped down, and the troopers were met with a wall of blinding blaster fire. Even though they all wore the same armor, Finn could tell who his friends were by how they moved. Minutes into the battle, you see Slip go down, shot by a sniper taking cover near X-Wing. First Order troopers were taught to ignore casualties until the objective was taken. But Finn didn't care. Slip was his brother, and it had always been his responsibility to look after him. He knelt down and placed his hand over the wound on his chest. Slip groaned and reached for Finn's face, but found a cold helmet blocking his way. Giving up, he sighed and went still. The rest of the battle was a blur for Finn. There were moments where he was hyper-aware of every scream and blaster impact around him. And then there were moments where he felt like he was dreaming, sleepwalking through the flames that burned and licked at the edge of his consciousness. He remembered encountering a frightened villager, a woman holding a child. He remembered feeling so ashamed that he was the cause of her fear. He remembered not firing on her just like he had in the simulation. After Slip died, Finn left the Order. His friend's death had no reason to it. The battle itself had been pointless and cruel. The First Order was supposed to represent peace and order, not death and destruction. Finn had something inside of him that was quite rare and special. He had a natural moral compass and inborn compassion. It was because of these things that he was able to resist the First Order's extreme childhood conditioning. In some ways, he reminds me of Luke, completely incorruptible. We don't know what ended up happening to his friend Zero's, but Nines eventually caught up with Finn, and he was angry and saw him as a traitor. He almost killed him too if it wasn't for Han Solo and his newfound love for Chewie's bowcaster. But in the end, without his leadership, Finn's squad fell apart. So that's the in-depth story about why Finn left the First Order. I'm actually kind of curious what you guys would do in a situation. Would you stay, or would you run? Let me know in the comments below. Well, actually, you know what? I had a lot of fun last time with the poll, so let's do another poll. The results in one of our next episodes. Hit the little card button and be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification button you guys know you don't miss our next episode because each one. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the story. I sure enjoyed telling it. And if you don't mind, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button so you guys know exactly when we upload our next video. And if you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.